We talk to the legends of the creative and entertainment industries. We talk to those on the rise. Steen Anthony Nielsen asks about the highs, the lows, and everything in between. This is Outcast Creative, and this is Industry Interviews.
Hello. Sorry, running a few minutes late there, but welcome to Industry Interview 103. 102 was yesterday, 103 is today. Today I'm welcoming back one of my earlier guests who came on nearly 2 years ago, I think it was, about a year and a half ago. A very special man who's written a number of books, some of which I actually have up here. Done a fantastic biography on the career of Burt Reynolds, one of my favorite actors of all time. Done a fantastic biography on the director Walter Hill, one of my favorite directors of all time. And now he's turned his attention to, among other things, because he's got many other books out, a book about the Halloween series of films, of which there have been 13. Myself and my special co-host, the Inside Man, who's now here.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Just in case, I've had some issues with my internet recently. So if I suddenly disappear from the screen, that's why. And you'll be able to ably carry on in my stead.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, fantastic. So good to see DJ Play Nice is in the chat. Thanks very much for coming on. Do like and subscribe. Share the stream if you can. And yeah, we're gonna carry on. So we're mainly going to be talking about Wayne's new book, which talks about the Halloween movies and the production of them, kind of a lot of stuff behind them. He's met a lot of the key people involved, including the director of photography of some of these movies, the directors of some of these movies. Let's bring in the man himself, sporting an excellent haircut, if I may say so. It's Wayne Byrne. Thank you very much for coming.
Hello, Lance and Inside Man. Thanks for having me back.
No, not at all. Great to have you back. And I'm a man of my word and said I would always support you if you've got a new book coming out or anything of that nature. And the book I think it's just dropped, isn't it?
It's actually coming out in another few weeks. So it actually isn't physically available yet, but the pre-orders are up and getting some good early buzz at the moment from some people who've read it. So it's looking good. I can't wait for it to come out.
Yeah, I've read a little bit of it. You can already pre-order it as a hardcover. I take it the soft cover won't be coming out for a while yet, but you can already pre-order it on Amazon. I'll put the link up for that in a second, and here it is. You can't kill the Boogeyman. You certainly can't. The Ongoing Halloween Saga, 13 movies and counting, with a foreword by Tony Timpone. For the people that don't know, would you enlighten my audience as to who Tony is?
Tony was the long-time editor of Fangoria magazine, which any horror fans out there will know is the horror Bible. It's the ultimate horror magazine. It was, especially throughout the 80s and 90s, but the 80s in particular was your kind of go-to publication to find out everything and anything about horror movies, whether it was kind of the lower budget independent stuff or these kinds of, franchise sequels. And they had great access to directors, to the studios, because these people knew the value of Fangoria. So there was a great relationship there between them. And this is actually detailed in the book because as the Halloween films progressed, that relationship got a bit fractured, especially when the Weinsteins took over the Halloween franchise. But Fangoria was the absolute Bible for horror fans, and Tony Timpone led it through its greatest years, in my opinion. So to have him comment on the book and what's inside, was a great honor for me. It's very exciting to have his name undermined there.
Yeah, I had several issues of Fangoria up until probably about 15 years ago. And I had the issue that covered the film My Bloody Valentine. and I
Right.
remember that the stills in the magazine made the film seem far more gory than it was when I actually got to watch it. It was like one frozen image of a pickaxe going through a guy's skull, coming out through his eyeball. The eyeball was on the end of the pickaxe and all this kind of thing. And I was like, when I saw the film, the shot wasn't quite like that. But I think Fangoria always got invited onto the sets, didn't they? And they would go and take their own stills, I think.
Yeah, in the case of Halloween, because they were low budget productions from 4 onwards, so 4 or 5, they were kind of, they didn't have the best on-set photographers, they didn't have the best publicity departments. So Fangoria actually, got them to do some special photographs specifically to get the cover and to get some, good images in the magazines. Like I say, it was different then. Once the Weinsteins took over the property, they weren't so cooperative with Fangoria. They didn't necessarily see the value of that relationship, which was, I think, detrimental, in the end. Because it was
very much so. Very much so. I mean, because in essence, I mean, Fangoria was really, things like Fangoria and Cinefantastique were the conduit between the movie makers and the fans. That was the channel. And start to remove that, then we end up exactly where we are today.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the way it is these days, it's not just Fangoria anymore. There are other horror magazines, and of course there's many podcasts and online outlets. So it doesn't maybe have quite the cachet that it did under Tony's editorialship, but it was for a period the absolute go-to publication for anything horror.
Yeah. I mean, there were always incredible interviews with makeup effects people and that kind of thing. In fact, this issue here with Funhouse on the cover, I had that issue. I remember reading through the one about scanners with the exploding head.
And there's Halloween 2.
There's Halloween 2, yeah. Made the cover. Yeah, I mean, literally anything with something grisly would make the cover. Ghost Story is a really underrated film. I really like that movie, actually. It's the one with Fred Astaire, I think, is in it.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's The Thing.
There's Halloween 3. Great Halloween 3.
Yeah, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which you and I have talked about that film at some length before. All right, so I guess before we trawl through the Halloween movies, and for anyone watching this who's thinking, well, it's like March, why are you not doing this in Halloween? Well, blame Wayne, because he couldn't get the book ready in time for Halloween, so we have to do this now.
Yeah. That you have to ask Bloomsbury about that. That's out of my control.
Okay, so how did you first get interested in the Halloween movies? Would that have been through a mutual interest in the director John Carpenter by any chance? Because that was it for me.
Not really. My first love of Halloween is Halloween 3, strangely enough. And that goes back to the same as when I discovered the Elm Street movies, because I did the book on the Elm Street movies. It was through my dad. He really kind of introduced me to movies very early on. Probably too early in some people's minds, because I remember the day I was coming home in the car from school. I was about 6 years old at the time. And he told me that he had taped a movie off BBC the previous night that he thought I might like. And I was like, okay, what is it? And it's called Halloween 3. And at that stage, I had no idea what, Halloween was or anything like that. So went home and watched it. And it was this, bizarre, fantastical thing about an evil Irish toy maker trying to wipe out the children of America. But it was just it's so fun. And as I say, bizarre and kind of surreal and colorful. And there's something very unique about it. So it captured my attention. And from there, the Halloween name, the Halloween brand kind of stuck with me. So I went and rented, at the time, Halloween 4 and Halloween 5 had just come out on VHS. This is in Ireland, so 1988, 89. And that's kind of how I got into it. And then from there, I went back to Halloween 2 and then Halloween 1. So my chronology is a bit all over the place in terms of when and how I found these movies. But really, my love of these movies stems from Halloween 3. To this day, it probably still is my favorite, objectively speaking, of the movies. But we can go into detail on each one, my thoughts. But Halloween 3 really is the catalyst for it all.
Yeah, I it's funny because when Halloween 3 came out, I can't remember which order I saw the first two in. It might be because I remember that the first horror film of Carpenter's that I saw was The Fog. And I absolutely loved that movie. Yeah. So sort of having seen that and then seeing Halloween 1, which was in the wrong order, thought Halloween was okay. Halloween 2 was pretty grim, as in lots of horrible deaths.
It wasn't very fashionable to like Halloween 3 up until about 5 years ago because everybody hated it. And it's kind of had a vitalization since, the boutique labels have re-released it and all that in nice special editions. But for the longest time, you could only get it in these very bad transfers over here, at least. MIA released a DVD of it, which was heavily cut, and it was 4:3. It was like an old VHS print. And even the VHS copies weren't great, So we never really had a fully uncut, nice-looking version of Halloween 3 for the longest time. But it was a great thrill for me to write about that movie and meet Tommy Lee Wallace and talk to him, the director, and talk to him about this new life that this movie has, which he is so surprised about and but equally as happy about because finally after 40 years, 42 years, whatever it is, now people get it. But I think it's one of those films as well that if you know the context of its origins and its pedigree, you might appreciate it a bit more because obviously the whole intention of the Halloween franchise was never to be a series of films. Yeah, with Michael Myers. That was never the original intention. The whole idea was every movie was going to be a different story about Halloween. But of course, Halloween 2 happened because the success of the first one. But then they said, okay, now let's get back to our original idea, which is to just do tales about Halloween. And also, you have to remember, this is a Nigel Kneale script. So if you're a fan of Quatermass and The Pit or things like that, you can see elements of Kneale's British horror from the 60s and 70s. Yeah. So you can see what they were trying to do. And also it's a great homage to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean, Santa Mira, the town of Santa Mira is the town of Santa Mira from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And the whole ending of the film, which is this kind of ambiguous thing, you don't know what's going to happen, everything is still in danger, goes back to the original, Don Siegel's original version of Invasion of the Body Snatcher. So there's a lot of great things going on in there that if you forget about the fact that it has Halloween in its title, I mean, if it was just called Season of the Witch, it probably would have been considered a lot better than it is because I think people just thought, okay, there's no Michael Myers, there's no continuity from the first two films. This, what is this? And kind of wrote it off. So, and also it's interesting from an Irish person's perspective because the Irish aren't considered too well in the film. But Tommy Lee Wallace, in fairness to him, said that Neil's script was a little bit harsher to Irish because you have to remember it was written at the time as well when the Troubles were still raging.
Yeah. Right.
So Tommy Lee Wallace thought, okay, there's a bit of xenophobia going on here, and he had to tone it down a bit because even though the villain is Irish, he didn't want to be considered, an anti-Irish movie. So there's a lot of interesting things going on there, and I've always found it a fascinating movie from an aesthetic point of view, a thematic point of view, and now cultural point of view. So, I mean, it was my way in when the opportunity of doing this book came to me. This was the thing that made me want to do it. The opportunity to explore this movie and then jump off of that into all the others, because after the perceived success of my Elm Street book, publishers and agents want you to kind of replicate that and do more of those kind of franchise examinations. And I didn't really want to just end up doing that, because as you know, Lance,
there it is.
There it is. I love that book. And as you know, Lance, the subjects of my books vary quite a bit. Some people might consider me the horror guy because of the Elm Street book, but I'm not just the horror guy. My interests are across the whole spectrum of film culture, cinema history. So I kind of batted away a few ideas that came my way of for writing about franchises, because at the end of the day, I have to think about do I want to spend a whole year with just this set of films? Because you're going to be watching these movies a lot.
Yeah,
You really have to love the franchise as a whole, even though there's good ones, bad ones, better ones, worse ones, whatever. But some franchises, there might be one or two really good ones, and then the rest of them are not good. So you have to consider these things when you're going into a project, what you're going to spend your time working with. And I said, I could do this. I could work with the Halloween franchise for a year or a year and a half, whatever it was. And it was a pleasant surprise. And my other way in was, I loved a lot of the people who made these movies, as in I loved their work. So it was an opportunity really to celebrate them. And that's what the book is more about.
Yeah.
It's celebrating the people who made these movies. Because if you think about the cinematographers and the directors, I mean, Dwight Little, Dominique Otten and Gerard, cinematographer like Dean Cundy and Peter Lyons Collett, these are really, really interesting careers that this book was an opportunity to talk about them and to talk to them. So I knew this could never be a definitive making of Halloween, because this has already been done. I mean, if you look at all the special features on the various boutique label releases, all the documentaries, all the interviews, all that history is already there. So there's no point in me just recreating that on the page. What I wanted to do was something different, which was to go deeper beyond the making of the productions. It was to let's dig into who the people are who made these movies, why they made them. So it traces their careers before the movies and after the movies, and what making the movies has meant to them. Because if one thing I found in writing the Elm Street book is, if you make a franchise entry, that changes your life. You are forever known to be part of that franchise.
Yeah.
And some people kind of trade off that then for the rest of their careers. So it was really interesting. And a lot of the time, the directors or the filmmakers or whoever, they're not necessarily into horror. So sometimes they have a little bit of a kind of combative relationship with the fact that it's, so closely aligned with the genre, but sometimes they end up embracing it, and they could end up having a whole career because of their association with, say, Elm Street or Halloween. So I find it culturally fascinating, when filmmakers, dip their toes in the horror genre, and then where they go from there and where they came from. Because a lot of these guys came from the independent cinema world as well.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you go from indie movies to a franchise sequel, and you're in the big leagues,
So
those were all the things.
You wanted to ask a question, I think.
Yeah, I was going to ask you one. So what do you think would be, in your personal opinion, what do you think is the reason for the reevaluation of Halloween 3?
I think there's this cycle that goes on in culture. I think it's maybe a 30 to 40 year thing, where things that we grew up with, which we have an affection for, but weren't considered objectively valuable or whatever. We can look back 40 years later and appreciate them for nostalgic reasons, for personal reasons.
Yeah.
And we can also see the intentions, I think, of good filmmakers, as you can see in Halloween 3. I mean, at the time this came out, it would have been just considered another random horror sequel. I don't think people would have been thinking, oh, it's the great Dean Cundy shooting the movie, or it's a good director like Tommy Lee Wallace kind of making his first mark on cinema, or, the great Tom Atkins. I don't think people would have looked at it like that back then. But we look back at it and we go, wow, Dean Cundy shot this movie, and look at all the things Dean Cundy went on to do. The Spielberg movies, Back to the Future, all the big blockbusters. So now we're kind of looking back at it through a different lens. We know what the filmmakers have gone on to do. We know they're great now. But back in 1983, we didn't have that prism to look through to go, this is made by great filmmakers. People just went, oh, it's a Halloween 3. I think that's part of it. It's somewhat nostalgia, and then somewhat we're looking back on it through a different cultural lens.
I mean, it's funny because I was one of the few people that really loved Halloween 3 when I saw it at the time.
Snap.
And and there was a friend of mine who'd seen an uncut version of it, and when we were watching it, he was like, "There's more stuff in this bit. This bit's been cut. This bit's been cut."
Yeah.
I don't know how he saw an uncut version of it. Maybe it was a pirate or something like that.
I think BBC or UTV showed the uncut version of it back in the day. But if you saw it on video, if you rented it, it was the cut version.
Yeah, I rented it, so it was the cut version, and it was many moons before I saw the uncut version. I mean, maybe this friend of mine saw it at the cinema. So I'm guessing the cinema version was the uncut one, and the cut one all came about as probably part of the Video Nasties, Mary Whitehouse period of censorship.
I think it was after that, wasn't it? It was quite,
83 was it?
83, yeah, 83 was the yeah.
It was,
So
it would have been around that time.
Yeah, the original release was actually Warner Brothers. They briefly had the rights to it on home video, and that was quite heavily censored. And it was later versions. Then there was a couple of different cuts of it, and I don't think there was ever a definitive uncut UK version. So it's really only now with the kind of the new Blu-ray releases, both the Scream Factory one and then a couple of I think like a German edition are completely uncut, so people can finally see that it's a lot more gruesome than what we would have grown up watching.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it because it was a self-contained movie, and I think in the second Halloween film, I'd seen the first two movies. I didn't like the idea of this guy could be shot in the head and he wasn't dead. I just thought it was stupid, and I was like, therefore, if he can never die, it's a bit like it's a bit like the problems with a Marvel film. If all your protagonists can never get killed, all the action kind of becomes redundant.
Yeah, I mean, there's no tension.
No, exactly. You can fly through as many buildings as you want and blow up as many trucks and tanks and what have you. But if Superman isn't really ever deemed to be at risk, then it's really not very exciting. And I think that's kind of towards the end of the second, or at the end of the second Halloween film. When I heard there was a third one coming out, the reason I didn't try and bunk in to see it at the cinema was because I thought, well, I don't want to see another film about that guy running around who's already been shot and burned and run over by a car and this and that. And then when I watched it and it was a completely different story, I was like, oh, this is really good. I like this. And I like this idea of these masks that are going to melt and cause this kind of plague. And I thought it was really cool. And, these guys are robots. What the fuck's going on? This is very interesting. I'm engaged.
It's a great idea. And there's some great teams in there. I mean, there's this whole, kind of commentary in there on, capitalist society and all things like that, because we have this, rich, this Irish industrialist megalomaniac, who's come in and kind of culturally taken over this town. It's an industrial town. They're all basically his droids or his slaves. They all work for him. As they say, it's a company town, so it's there's some nice commentary and themes working its way through there that are there's probably more in it, intellectually going on than in many of the other Halloween movies.
Yeah, it's a good film. I really like Tom Atkins, who played the lead in The Fog.
Tom's great, and I love that he's the most unpolitically correct action hero ever. I mean, he's a deadbeat dad. He's cheating on the wife. He's drinking a 6-pack everywhere he goes. He's sleeping with his patient's daughter, for God's sake. He's everything that should be wrong, but Tom just makes him right.
I think he's still alive, Tom Atkins.
He is.
Yeah, man, I'd love to interview him. He must be in his 90s by now, I would have thought.
He's close to it, yeah.
Yeah.
Look at that photography, man. Those shots are just incredible.
Yeah, the established shots of the town. And Dean Cundy did these great established shots of the town, made it feel really creepy. And there's all these cameras mounted on poles and stuff
that was
like
great.
that.
It was great for Dean because it was not continuing the Michael Myers story. He had a bit more free reign to bring a different visual sense. I mean, on Halloween 2, his whole thing was he had to keep the style consistent from the first one. So he had to kind of remember all his lighting style, his lenses, everything. Whereas on this, he made it a bit brighter. He made it a little bit more colorful. He made it a bit more garish to give it that kind of, I don't know, almost comic book, graphic novel kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
But if you look at 1 and 2, he does a great job of keeping it consistent in style, because you kind of have to. You have to believe that it's one story, one night.
Yeah, you've got like the Michael POV thing, and there's always those lingering shots and those cutbacks to like dark doorways where maybe somebody's about to come out, and a lot of that going on. This was a great shot. This is one of the ones I was referring to, actually.
And I can't see these images without thinking of the score as well, which was fantastic, which was by Alan Howard and John Carpenter. So, I mean, that's one of the things about this movie I find it really interesting, and it feels like an other early 80s Carpenter movie. Even though Carpenter, he wrote a draft, he co-did the score, and maybe there's an executive producer credit, but other than that, he was hands off. This is Tommy Lee Wallace's movie in terms of directorship. But it feels so much a part of the Carpenter oeuvre, if you will, that world. Everything from the Dean Cundy widescreen Panavision anamorphic photography to the synthesizer, very simple synthesizer score, and other elements. The cast, of course, recurring actors. But to me, it feels as much a Carpenter movie as a Tommy Lee Wallace movie or any other movie.
Yeah, I have to say that. Of all the films in the franchise, this one and number one are probably my two favorites. I think I've probably only seen 6 of the 13 Halloween movies, because unless I'm wrong, apart from Season of the Witch, all of the rest are basically about Michael Myers coming back somehow.
They are. The Dublin Inn. I love that. The Dublin Inn. It's so
Wayne can be found drinking in there if you visit. I mean, it's that. Well, we'll get to that, but okay. So let's go back to the beginning and do a sort of a walkthrough, as it were. So we have the first Halloween came out in '78, directed by John Carpenter. One of the things about this film, even though anyone watching it now who's, let's say, 18 years of age will probably turn around and moan and say, I can't believe you were scared of this shit, Dad, But in its day, and you have to remember that there weren't dozens and dozens and dozens of horror films available at this time. We only had a trickle of horror movies coming out from either America or Italy. The stuff that the simple things that Carpenter did in this film at the time were quite ingenious. It was a very clever way of building up tension and horror.
I mean, there's one of these. There's an argument that I constantly have with people. I mean, I'm a big fan of Black Christmas. I absolutely adore Black Christmas, and it is one of the early kind of slasher movies, if you like. And it predates Halloween. However, I'd still consider this to be the first real slasher movie, because this was the first one that really hit it big. I mean, even Herschel Gordon Lewis had done movies, slasher movies prior to Black Christmas. So, but this was the first one where people kind of sat up and thought, "Hang on a minute, there's money to be made in that. There is definitely, a bit of a cash grab. Hence, having all of the slasher clones that came after, and obviously, a predecessor would be Texas Chainsaw Massacre 5 years earlier. But this was the real big commercial success. And it was a scary movie. It's still a creepy movie, I think.
It is, and I think it comes down to a certain simplicity as well. Which is Carpenter is, simplicity is his thing. Keep it as simple as possible. But I think also there's an aesthetic elegance to the film that a lot of those other movies that you mentioned don't have.
I agree totally. This launched the career of Jamie Lee Curtis, and there's a few other Carpenter regulars in it. I think Nancy Loomis is one of them. Yeah, because she also was in The Fog. She was also in Assault on Precinct 13.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, but weren't they looking at both Vincent Price and Christopher Lee for the role?
That came up. That did come up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which would have been, I mean, a completely different film, I think. Perhaps a more theatrical performance. You know, two amazing performers, but I think Pleasance brings a different. I mean, those are the two guys you mentioned. You know, they're very beautiful, handsome film stars, and Pleasance brings a more kind of how do you guess? I don't know how to say it, but you know, he's
I think
a more
kind of
average.
a vulnerability, maybe.
Yeah, and he brings the same qualities, let's say, Tom Atkins brings to Halloween 3, which is a more everymanish kind of quality, even though he's playing a doctor. You know, he's not a kind of a, how to say, highfalutin kind of doctor. He's, you know, he's obsessed with this thing that's
there's nothing of the other class about him.
Yeah,
He's kind of, maybe just slightly blue collarish, perhaps.
Yeah, and you can see that in the difference in some of the scenes where he's talking to other doctors, you know, in either cut of the film. And, you know,
mad doctor with gun will travel.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah. He's believable in that. You know, I think if you had Christopher Lee in that role, he would have been a bit too elegant almost.
I think he would have been far more serious as well. He plays Pleasance plays him with a kind of a frenetic, sort of mad energy.
Yeah, and it's even the accents. When I think of the accents of Vincent Price and Christopher Lee, there's a different kind of cadence and quality than, say, what Donal brought to it, which was a more, I don't know, immediate, as you say, maybe more blue collar British accents than upper class.
Yeah.
So Halloween was, you know, kind of well, one might say it was an unexpected success. It wasn't an expensive film to make, and of course, when an unexpensive film makes a lot of money, the studios like that, and they turn around and say, can you make us another one? So I think wisely, the second film literally shows the ending of the last movie, keeps most of the cast in situ, introduces a few new characters, and picks up literally minutes after the events of the first film. I kind of liked that because I kind of liked, you know, now the character's going to hospital and so on. And the first 26 minutes or so of the movie, which I rewatched again today, take place in a couple of houses as Michael Myers makes his way towards the hospital, where unfortunately Jamie Lee Curtis's character has ended up. And then he gets into the hospital and manages to bulldoze his way through most of the staff. And it seems like a very understaffed hospital at the time. Rick Rosenthal, who directed Halloween 2, directed Bad Boys, which is one of the first really good performances in Sean Penn's career. Also stars Clancy Brown, about a young offenders institution. It's a bit like the Scum. It's the American equivalent of Scum, basically. And I really like that film. I always really rated that film. I don't think it got the critical praise that it should have done. Halloween 2 is okay. Do you want to say anything about Halloween 2, Wayne?
Yeah, I think it's, as I mentioned here earlier on off camera, that it was one of the early ones that really grabbed me as well, because I didn't, you know, when I was watching these movies when I was that young, I didn't go, well, Halloween 2 isn't as good as Halloween 1 because it's not a John Carpenter film. I didn't have that frame of reference. I just thought it was a great horror movie. It's a great haunted house movie because it largely is just set within the walls of the hospital. So it's a very confined kind of movie. It's a very, as we can see from that image, very dark movie. And I loved it. It's very unpretentious. You know, it is elegant like the first movie because you have Dean Cundy shooting it. So it does have a brilliantly artful look to it.
Yeah.
But it's going more.
Continuity.
Yeah, but it's going more for the violence and the gore, because of course, like they were on this movie, they were working with Universal because, as we said earlier, you know, if your first movie made that much money, you know, you're going to want to get in with the big boys are coming after you to work with them. So it was a bigger release, a bigger production, I guess, relatively speaking, and so they wanted more gore. And it's looking back at it, it's obviously not as good as the first one. I mean, it's a different kind of quality going on, but I could happily watch it any night as much as I could the first one. In fact, when I do watch either one, I tend to watch both of them because they do make a great double bill.
Yeah, it's almost like one long
Yeah.
movie. There's a young Billy Warlock on the right who later on would be one of the lead cast in Baywatch, and I think he also
Right.
was in that. He was also in that weird movie, Society. Remember
Oh
Society?
Yes, Brian Usna.
Yeah, that's
And we'll get to it later on, but it has to be said that Rick Rosenthal, who did this one, also did perhaps the most critically reviled or most divisive one, which was Halloween Resurrection.
right.
So he came back, but this one
I haven't seen that one. I'm sure they offered him substantial monies to come back.
it's of a different quality, but as you'll hear, I do like each of these movies in their own way. I think that's the thing about that's again one of the things why I wanted to do this book was like with Elm Street. Every movie has its own look, its own feel, its own tone. Because they're different directors, and each director brings his own style, and that's what makes it fun. If it was the same director for all the movies and it had consistency of style and tone and whatever, it would probably get quite boring. But I love the fact that it is so different. It just gives you so much more to play with as a writer. So much more to talk about and dig into.
Yeah. Well, Halloween 3 we've talked about already. Writer Albert Lanier, who I think I have seen in the chat before. Halloween 3 was surprisingly one of the better Halloween movies, even though
totally
Michael
agree.
Myers was absent. Yeah, I it's my favorite. So yeah, Halloween 2, pretty consistent. You could almost think it had been directed by Carpenter, largely down to, I think, Dean Cundy, really.
It really is. And Dean even said that, one of the things that, Carpenter and Deborah Hill, Carpenter didn't want to direct it. Because you have to remember at this time, he was doing The Thing. So he was otherwise occupied. But he didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to get pigeonholed into just doing the Halloween movies. But he did say, one of the caveats, he said to Dean, you do have to make it consistent with the first one. So, there was a little bit of back and forth between Dean Cundy and Rick Rosenthal in terms of, Rick had his own ideas on how the movie should look and feel, but Dean kind of had to rein him in and say, listen, the reason we're doing this is because John said it has to be consistent with the first film. It has to look the same. And this is how he did it on the first movie. So,
and John Carpenter was a producer of the second film. So
exactly. Yeah. So he wasn't necessarily there and on board and giving direction, but he did ultimately have final say over these films.
Two great actors here that I want to comment on quickly. Lance Guest, who I'm actually named after, so there you go, from the who also appeared in The Last Starfighter. So if you want to know why I'm named Lance, it's after this actor. Leo Rossi also played one of the rapists in the Jodie Foster film The Accused.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
he played the main instigator, actually, called the Scorpion. He's always playing nasty people. But I forgot that he was in Halloween 2. He's been around for a long time. I'm trying to track him down for an interview at the moment.
I saw him recently in one of my favorite horror sequels of all, which was Maniac Cop 3, Badge of Silence.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Maniac Cop. Oh my god, that's
love those movies. Though that Tree Perfect. Yeah. That's a beautiful trilogy.
That might be another book of yours coming up at some point.
Never know, man.
Yeah. Lance Guest is another one I've invited onto my podcast before. He's extremely difficult. He quit acting altogether and was a acting teacher for a while, but he's got a couple of credits recently, so I think they lured him back in. So we mentioned Halloween 3 already, so let's skip over to the last Halloween film that I ever saw at the cinema, which was Halloween 4. At least I think it was, because you'll know this, Wayne. There's one of them which starts with the lunatic asylum, there's like a thunderstorm, and they've all broken out, and they turn up at the gates, and it's near the start anyway, and there's all these patients wandering around. Now,
Well, that's the first movie. That's the first movie.
Is that the first movie?
Yeah, that's when Loomis and the nurse are arriving, and they see everybody's out on the ground.
Must be a scene similar to that, unless there's a flashback sequence.
Well, in the fourth movie, it opens with it's beautiful. It's the one movie that doesn't open with like, you know, the black background and the pumpkin disintegrating or whatever. It opens on the farmlands, and it's real creepy, eerie. It's probably my favorite opening of all the movies, or one of them. But then it cuts to the psychiatric hospital where they're moving Michael Myers. I think he's 21, so he's finally eligible to be tried or whatever. So they're putting him in the ambulance, and he overhears them saying that he has a niece back in Haddonfield, and this kind of reanimates him. And you know, now he has to go back to Haddonfield and kill her. So that could be the scene you're talking about, where it's there's an ambulance massacre.
Yeah.
You know, because there's the famous shot where he puts his thumb through the forehead of one of the doctors or something like that. So that could be it.
I do remember that sequence. I remember the opening that you're talking about. It was quite creepy and effective. Lots of kind of shots of wire fences, and with the sun gradually getting lower, and
beautiful,
that kind of thing, wasn't it?
And it doesn't have the Halloween theme as the initial opener. It's just these kind of, what I was talking to Alan Hart about it, and he said it's just kind of reverberated cymbal kind of screeches, very effective. But then when it gets to the psychiatric hospital, then the Halloween theme comes in. So it's, you know, he's bringing us back into the world of Halloween very subtly. So it's nice. But I think Halloween 4 is one of the best movies in the franchise. It is straight to the point. I think Dwight Little is such an underrated director. He directed one of my favorite movies of all time, which is my favorite, or one of my favorite. I don't know, I'm confused. Marked for Death, Steven Seagal.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's my favorite or not, but
that's the one with the rastas in it, right?
Yeah,
I actually do like that as purely as an action film. It's quite funny, even though, you know, the scenes where the rastas are going to beat him up in the shopping mall, you know, and Seagal just bests them with his usual kind of type thing.
It's kind of non-fighting kind of thing.
His non-fighting technique is pure nonsense. But,
Dwight Little, he's a really good director, very efficient, and I think this kind of goes back to the Carpenter style without maybe the artistic flourishes, as in it gets straight to the, you know, stock and slash, the trills, the spills, but without being kind of, it's not obviously nowhere near as gory as the later films in the franchise.
Yeah.
But Dwight Little just gets the tone of Halloween perfect in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He's done a couple of other movies that I've really liked. He did the Brandon Lee Rapid Fire, which I thought was a good little film. And he also did Murder at 1600, which I thought was a good, that's kind of a good little thriller, isn't it?
Yeah. And Seagal actually wanted him for Hard to Kill. Seagal was a fan of Halloween 4. He wanted Little to do Hard to Kill, but the studio, Warner Brothers, wouldn't have him, because all he'd done was, you know, this movie and a couple of other small indie action movies. So this wasn't enough, even though it was #1 at the box office, for Warner Brothers to let them kind of give their star, you know, whatever.
He also did that Indiana Jones ripoff. Well, they tried to market it as such, Bloodstone.
Oh, Bloodstone,
yeah. That's not a great movie. I remember renting that and thinking, what's this? Is trying to be like Raiders of the Lost. It's trying to be like an indie film, but with none of the talent involved. Which, you know, was a shame, because maybe they could have made a good movie there somehow. But I imagine he was very restrained in terms of budget.
No, I think, and Dwight, I think, could have done part 5 if he had wanted to, because this was such a success. But he had the opportunity when Seagal didn't get on with Bruce Malmuth, who did direct Hard to Kill. So he had the option to go and do another movie with another studio, one movie outside of Warner Brothers, which was 20th Century Fox, and that was marked for death. So he had the choice at that stage to pick his director, and then he brought Dwight over for that one.
Right.
So Dwight had, do I do Halloween 5 or do I go and try and do something else? So in fairness to him, he went and did something else, and he went from there. He did, as you say, Rapid Fire, Free Willy 2, Murder at 1600, and some other movies. And fair play to him.
Yeah. Did you get to interview Dwight for the book?
I did. Very nice man. This is one of the things I loved about doing this book was, digging into all these directors' backgrounds and their influences and whatever. And each one had a different story, and which that these are the stories of the book. It's their stories. And very interesting man. Came from the Midwest. So I think that's why this film has such a really great, authentic Halloween feel. Because him and Peter Lyons-Collister, the cinematographer, who now is huge, big time cinematographer. I mean, he just did that new Sonic movie. So these are the kind of movies he's making these days.
Right.
But they both came from Ohio. So this movie was both filmed in Salt Lake City because, tax breaks or whatever. So they really knew this territory. They knew how this part of the country feels in this season. So they knew how to capture it very well. So, it wasn't filmed in Los Angeles like it usually is, which was an unusual stand-in for Illinois anyway, because the guys on the first movies had to make, summertime in Pasadena look like autumn in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So,
which,
hide the palm trees.
Yeah. Just like they did in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So that brings us on to Halloween 5, which I'm not sure I've even seen. Return of the Witch is the 2021. That's when we go back to. I'm getting confused now.
So 5 was The Revenge of Michael Myers.
Revenge of Michael Myers. That was it.
Yeah, it is a very, very divisive film.
Right. Okay. Well, let's get into that. Yeah, that one came out in '89.
Yeah.
I don't think I saw this movie.
This one, I think, in the UK and Ireland came straight to video. It was so quick after part 4 because they wanted to capitalize on the success of part 4.
Right.
But I don't think it went to the cinema. It went straight to video over here in the UK, and it's a shame. It's a very, very cinematic film, despite what people, criticize it for. It has some unusual comic elements. For anybody who's familiar with it, will know about. But Dominique Otten-Girard, who's a Swiss-French director, brought a very particular style to it. And the cinematographer, Rob Draper, excellent cinematographer. He was echoing Orson Welles' Touch of Evil here. I mean, it's visually a beautiful film and very stylish, but Dominique did some things which deviated from what fans would consider kind of sacrosanct elements of the Halloween franchise. I mean, there's one scene where Michael Myers actually shows a bit of emotion. He sheds a tear with his mask off.
Do you know what? I think I've seen that scene. Whether I've seen the whole film, I don't know. But
yeah, and as I say, there's some comedy police officers in there, which are probably for me the most unfortunate aspect of the movie.
Interesting to see that he's directed a film called Columbine, and I thought, oh wow, he's done a drama about Columbine, and I quickly went and had a look at it, and it's nothing to do with Columbine. It's about a girl who
his career's been strange. He didn't really go into the whole Hollywood thing after Halloween 5. I mean, he did some interesting films before Halloween 5. He did a British low budget horror thriller called After Dark with John Hurt.
After Darkness.
Yeah.
After Darkness, yeah.
With Julian Sands and John Hurt, and William Jacks was in that. I think I've seen it, but I can't remember a thing about it.
It was one of those kind of VHS store perennials in the mid to late 80s,
Yeah, but, I remember The Last American Elvis. He did that. I remember that.
Yeah.
But I think that's
Dominique was one of my favorite interviews. He was such a unique character.
Right.
special man to speak to, and we got on very well. So I really liked him.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes people like that have had the most interesting careers. I'm pretty sure this is the same actress that plays the mother in Scarface. When he comes home with some money and she just says, she realizes he's a criminal and she sends him away. Pretty sure that's this actress. Yeah. So
this continues the strand that Halloween 4 set up, which was kind of retconned later on, of Danielle Harris playing his niece, Jamie Lloyd. So it continues that. So that's a whole other discussion of how the Halloween franchise branches off into several little franchises of its own, depending on which arc of the story you want to follow. So this one continues what 4 set up. So you're kind of going from 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. That's its own little series. And then it branches off. Then you could go into 1, H20, Resurrection, or you can go into 1, Halloween 2018, and that whole thing. So it's quite confusing and a little bit.
Are you including a flow chart in your book that like a tree diagram that explains the spinning narratives of the strand?
I did my best to do it literarily, but no flow charts.
Yeah, I bet it was. Because I don't know. I mean, I just think, with James Bond, for example, as a IP, as a franchise, it's different because it's the same character, but usually until they started screwing around with the formula for the Daniel Craig era, self-contained story. There's a new villain. You kind of know what you're getting, but it when the films are done well, there's always something fresh and interesting about them. Yeah. But a Halloween film with Michael Myers in it, Michael Myers is going around killing people. He'll probably get killed several times, but he'll still kill more people. He'll get killed in a really big way at the end, but not big enough. And then we go on to the next one, which is why I haven't seen a lot of the later movies. But it doesn't mean as works of art they're not interesting or don't have merit or don't have positive qualities. And it also doesn't mean that they're not enjoyed by lots of other people who can't get enough of Michael Myers.
Exactly. They're popular for a reason, and it has continued to become this kind of popular culture icon for a reason. So my way into these films was not to kind of criticize them from an objective, critical perspective,
sure,
fool's errand. So my thing was to look at them and look at their values and look at their flaws, but look at what each filmmaker or filmmakers brought to these films and made their own. And this is a prime example, Halloween 5, because as you can see from the various stills rolling by here, he had a very definite style and a unique style. And this film does not look like any of the other films in the franchise.
Right. Yeah, I can tell that just from the stills. The one that followed
the European sensibility.
Yeah, the one that followed this, I think, was Inside Man cameo there on the right. Yeah, good mask, mate.
Yeah, no mask.
The one that followed this, I think, was it The Curse of Michael Myers in '95? Was there a bit of a gap?
6. Yes, part 6. So there was 89 to 95.
Right.
So yeah, a bit of a gap, and it changed hands. So the Weinsteins took over. So you had Dimension Films, which was relatively new at that point. They had, I think they made a Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, and they did Children of the Corn part 3 or 4. So they were kind of getting into the horror business. So it was Miramax's horror wing, and in fairness, all they were doing was these kind of cookie cutters, straight to video sequels. But Halloween was bigger, had a bigger budget, and it was a theatrical release. But it went through some turbulent production. And I'm actually a big supporter of this movie. I think it's very underrated. I do like both versions. There's 2 very different versions of it. There's the theatrical version, which is a bit more. One of the reasons I like it is because it's like part 4 and 5. It's just going for the jugular. It's not trying to be an artistic statement of any kind. It's just going, let's try and be a good Halloween slasher movie. And I think it does well at that. Now, then when you look at the producer's cut, which is what it's called, it goes deeper into the mythology that was set up in part 5. They start trying to explain Michael Myers a bit, that, you know, he's the result of this kind of cult that has been, you know, kind of grooming him or whatever it is, you know, and it's a whole other thing. But I do think it's a really fun movie. Both versions are very fun. I don't see why the hate for it. I don't get it. I mean, other than the fact that there's 2 versions, and you can look at one and say, well, that's better than the other, and you can see where they changed things, where the Weinsteins kind of said, okay, we need more gore, we need a rock score rather than the synth score or the piano score. You know, it's an interesting example of one movie in 2 very different versions.
Yeah. So the 2 versions have 2 different scores.
2 different scores, loads of different scenes, different ending. Completely different movie.
I'd be really interested to watch those 2 films back to back, and I bet the non Harvey Scissorhands version is the better film. But
it is. It's closer to what the screenwriter Daniel Farran's intended. Not entirely, but closer. And Daniel Farran's, I mean, it's interesting. He was a fan. Like, I mean, he was very young when he wrote this movie.
Right.
So he was, you know, but like in many cases, you know, directors, producers don't want the screenwriter on set. So eventually he was taken off the set. So he didn't have, you know, a say in the matter. But I had a lot of fun doing this one. Marion Hagen, who is the lead female actor in this, she was brilliant to talk to, and she was one of those great examples of when writing these books, where sometimes, you know, when you're talking to the people who make these movies, I might come in with certain ideas that I want to talk about, like intellectual ideas, themes, subtexts, and sometimes people might be like, I don't know if that's in there or if it was intended. But the stuff I brought up to Marion, she totally saw, and she said, yes, these are the kind of things that I was bringing to the character. I mean, she said at one stage she was thinking of there's a great scene in the movie of, she plays this kind of woman in her early 20s. You know, she's going to community college. She's, you know, middle-class family in Haddonfield, but she had a child out of wedlock very young. And the father has a real, you know, chip on the shoulder about that, because that's not how things are done in their family. You know, so, but she was like, I'm bringing ideas of ordinary people. I love that. I love the fact that she was thinking of ordinary people while making a Halloween 6 movie. So we kind of met on that intellectual level, and I loved that, because, you know, that really gave me some good stuff to talk about in the movie, thematically speaking. So these are the great things that I love about doing these books.
You couldn't get Paul Rudd to have a chat with you about it.
Definitely. Yeah,
he was less keen probably to
I didn't even go there, but you know.
Fair enough.
But I always seem to think that when I think the moment that we start to get backstories, backstories tend to be the excuse for the behavior of a character. And I think when we start getting backstories, which, you know, this person was treated in this way, they were a shy person, they were bullied, they grew up in an abusive household, etc., etc. As soon as we start to get that, then I think we start to feel more sympathy for the villain, the person that we're supposed to loathe and be scared of, than we do for the victims. And I think that's probably where this one perhaps fell down somewhat, and why it does receive the kind of vitriol that it does. You know, because we have that reversal of where our emotions should be.
Totally. I mean, Carpenter has maintained all along that Michael Myers should only ever be treated as blank and utter evil.
Yeah.
That there should be no backstory. There should be no explanation. And, you know, obviously Rob Zombie went into that even more with his movies. But I like it in that, you know, I approach a lot of my books from a kind of a, I guess, psychological perspective. So I do lean into those kind of things a bit, and I do enjoy them. You know, kind of offers me a bit more to talk about, when you see these kind of themes floating around in something like Halloween 6. But I can totally appreciate what Carpenter brings to part 1, which is it's just blank evil. There's nothing behind it. There's nothing to read into from, say, the parents treating him bad or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate both sides, but I did like the opportunity when it got to this strand of the franchise, where they did try and explain, Michael Myers is part of a cult or whatever it is, the family connection, the bloodlust, But it's not for everybody, and I guess that was one of the reasons I actually did like Rob Zombie's movie as well, is because he treated it totally as a sociological reasoning that Michael Myers is the way he is, But I can totally understand why people who are especially fans of the first movie didn't appreciate that.
Mm.
So Halloween 7, not to be confused, I'm assuming, with Halloween 7 Bloodline, which is currently in production, apparently.
Oh dear.
I've just found it on IMDb. Sorry to tell you this. Director Turn Up Taylor. So I hope Taylor turns up to direct.
Never heard of it.
It's on IMDb, because I was looking for Halloween 7, which is in the chronology is the one that follows the curse.
Turn Up Taylor is probably another pseudonym for Alan Smithy, I should imagine.
Could be. What is the by title of the 7th film, Wayne?
What was it? Halloween H20, 20 years later.
Okay, so it's right. So we got H20 is the next one, 20 years later. Okay, yeah. This is Jamie Lee Curtis is back. Now, is this the one? Because I've only seen one of the later Halloween movies. I'm not sure if it's this one. The one I saw was the one where she lives in a house. She's got all these traps and shit and a bunker, and she's ready for him.
That was the 2018 version.
Okay, so that's not this one.
No, this one is. It was the kind of commercial rebirth of the Halloween franchise, in that it was still the Weinsteins, but the fact that they got Jamie Lee Curtis back gave it a bit more authority, I guess you could call it. Money involved. They had a great director, Steve Miner.
I do like Steve Miner. Didn't he direct the first House film?
He did, yeah.
Yeah, I think I have the Blu-ray of that right behind me somewhere, if I can grab it.
And H20 is very much coming off of the whole Scream.
Yeah. Even the poster looks like a Scream movie poster, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's again, it's like Halloween 4. It's very efficient, quite short, very economical, and it gets straight to what people want in a Halloween movie. It's stylish. You can see the money on screen. But my fear when it got to this stage of the Halloween franchise, and it's more so in Resurrection, is that, after Scream, horror cinema in particular, started to get very kind of self-aware and ironic and, a little bit sarcastic and things like that. And I think that can kind of dilute the terror aspects, because, when characters are hyper-aware that they're, horror movie or they're aware of horror movies, it's a little bit in jokey. For me, but
I think you're right, and I think there came a time, a kind of a turning point. I mean, that whole Scream turning point, really, we suddenly started laughing more than we were showing our fear, and it, the balance was really tipped, and it became a very, very different animal, horror movies. And I like to get back to the real sort of nitty gritty, the real dark basics. I want to be scared when I see a horror movie. I don't want to laugh.
Absolutely. And I think, as I say, that you could see the money on the screen here, because Scream was very well shot.
Yeah.
And there was a whole slew of films here there was a bit of money behind them, and I think horror movies started to kind of come out of the alternative world a bit, and they were popular again. They were mainstream concerns. And I think when horror movies start getting too glossy or too beautiful almost, that can kind of kill the atmosphere a little as well.
Yeah.
But I think Darren O'Connor, the cinematographer here, did a beautiful job of, he did go back, he tried to lean into the Dean Cundy style of shooting, but it's a bright movie. It's not a gritty, dark kind of movie. It was of its time. which was I would call it the post-Scream era of horror movies.
Mm.
But I think this one gets a pass. I think it's when we get to Resurrection, it was really leaning into the self-aware, ironic thing.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Steve Miner as a director. I've got there's my House Blu-ray, the Arrow version. This is one of the best horror posters of all time. The hand, the disconnected hand ringing the doorbell.
Yeah.
And
I love House 2. House 2 is my favorite.
Yeah, I saw the second one. Second one was pretty good. But I saw it at the Odeon Leicester Square, the first movie, and it was a great little kind of, low budget horror film, but it's kind of fun and inventive and whatever. I think I might have rented H20 on DVD. Would have been a DVD rental. But the fact that I can't remember anything about it is not a good sign, really. I mean, where would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you score this film as?
Oh, it's high end stuff. I mean, it is a very, very good Halloween sequel. I mean, like I say, it's made by. It has quality production values. So, but you also have great filmmakers. So, great cinematographers, great editing, great directors. Now, one of the interesting things, again, Weinstein meddling here. John Ottman had his score mangled by the Weinsteins because John Ottman kind of went in to do this kind of almost Hitchcockian orchestral kind of stuff, and so the Weinsteins were like, what's this? This is not Halloween music. So what they ended up doing was they used some of Marco Beltrami's score from Scream, Scream 2, and Mimic, and spliced it in here with parts of Ottman's orchestral stuff. So what you're left with is kind of a hodgepodge of shrieks and shrills and whatever, and then orchestral music, and it's a weird score. So Ottman, I spoke to Ottman about this, and he's still not over it, I don't think, in terms of he can't bring himself to watch it without reliving the nightmare of having gone through this. Ottman was a considerable filmmaker. I mean, he's an editor, producer, composer. He's done the likes of Usual Suspects, Valkyrie. He's worked with Bryan Singer quite a bit, but the Weinsteins just didn't appreciate that he was trying to bring this Herman-esque quality to this film, which elevated it. It brought, again, as I said, there's money on the screen. You can hear it, you can see it. That there was something different about this movie than the previous sequels, which were more directly generic. I mean, generic in a really good way, But, and you have these stars. You have Josh Hartnett, Michelle Williams, Jamie Lee Curtis, LL Cool J. So it's a different kind of production off the bat.
Yeah, Josh Hartnett, particularly young.
I mean, you have Dawson's Creek. I think Michelle Williams was from.
Yeah, she would have just come off of that.
So very much, you're tapping into pop culture here of the time. 1998, it reeks of 98.
And Adam Arkin in this as well. Great actor. Really rate him. And you got Jodie Lynn O'Keefe in there as well. She's a pretty good actress.
No, this is it's a really, really good film.
Yeah. Well, maybe I need to rewatch this one and reevaluate it. Like I said, I can't really remember it. I think maybe I've seen the trailer, and I'm thinking I've seen the whole film, but maybe I just saw the trailer for it. But it was good that they got Miss Curtis back. And I mean, this would have been after True Lies. True Lies was 95.
4 or 5 years or so.
So Harvey must have waved her a bit of a paycheck, because I don't think she would have needed to do this film.
She did. I think she admitted to that it was for the paycheck. But you have to remember as well, now at this stage, the Weinsteins were full-blown Miramax Disney collaboration.
Yeah.
When they made Halloween 6, they were indie darlings. They were art house darlings. They had credibility. But by the time you get to Halloween H2O, they were huge. They were Oscar winners. They were considerable industry players. So it had a whole other cachet to it than the previous sequels.
Yeah. That's a very good That's a very good point. Did you reach out to Miss Curtis?
I did at one stage. Yeah, she had just finished the promo for the last Halloween Ends,
Right.
so she wasn't really up for talking about Halloween again, because this has always been kind of a thing with Jamie Lee Curtis, is that she does them and then she's like, okay, I'm done, and then she does them again, I'm done. And you know, I did say, you know, I'd reach out again in whatever, a year's time, but you know, in the end I didn't, because it was like with Carpenter. I'd reached out to Carpenter and he was on tour at the time.
Right.
And I said I'd check back in later on, and eventually I said, well, you know what, in that span of time I had talked to all these other directors and cinematographers and actors and editors, whoever, and I kind of like, these are new stories now. If I go back and talk to Jamie Lee and John, it's going to be the same stories that's in every documentary, every book.
Yeah.
So what's the point, really? Because I presume most fans have heard those stories before, have those documentaries, have those other books or whatever it is. I thought, this is fresher if I keep it with these new people who don't normally appear in the documentaries or whatever.
Yes, some of my guests that have come on for interviews who've come through you, Wayne, and I'm forever grateful for that, have been some of the most interesting and fascinating guests I've ever had on. I think Inside Man co-hosted at least one of those, and I mean, David McGiffert, man, that what a legend!
Wow,
absolutely.
And I think the longest interview we've ever done, you know, just shy of 3 hours or whatever. You know, I couldn't. I gave him like 3 opportunities to leave, and he was, no, I'll tell you another story. I was sure. Yeah,
you know, I have to thank David for putting me in touch with Dean, because of course they worked together on Back to the Future, Friend Rabbit, and all that. Yeah. So thank you, David, if you're watching. You know, David, I love David. So really grateful. And you know, I have to thank Nick McLean and Roy Wagner and Sean Clark, and you know, all these other people who really helped me in terms of reaching out to people that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, or maybe they wouldn't have talked to me otherwise, because maybe they're sick of talking about Halloween. You know. So.
Yeah, Roy Wagner was another fantastic guest who, I remember the A-bomb that he dropped in the first 2 minutes. Oh, well, you know, when I was on the set of a John Ford Western, and I was like, what? Yeah, you know, it's just, he, you know, met Hitchcock, and like, it was just nuts stories.
Yeah.
Of fast disappearing. So it's great to speak to these people.
Yeah, I mean, these are...
Sorry, man.
Yeah. No, please go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, these are the kind of unsung heroes of the movies we love.
Yeah.
You know, of course, we all hail John Carpenter. I mean, that goes without question. But I think each of these directors deserve, or cinematographers, whoever, deserve their moment in telling their story and how they got to this, what they brought to it and how they got there and where they went, you know. And but yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a certain, I'm presuming, fatigue in this community where they're probably talking about these movies a lot for various documentaries and things like that. So sometimes, you know, it might take an introduction from somebody to go, listen, Wayne has done these books. He has a certain way of doing things. It was like with the Burt Reynolds book, you know, straight away people are like, no, don't want to talk to you. Writers, no. Because Burt had such a hard time with people writing books about him and articles down the years that why would he talk to anybody, or why would they talk to anybody about him? Yeah. So sometimes you need people to vouch for you, or just say, listen, you should talk to Wayne. This is how he does things. He's all about the art. He's all about the artist and celebrating that. So I had a few people to thank in the book, and there's another guy I know called Mark Beer, who's a brilliant illustrator, and he does some stuff for Sean Clark. And he was very, very kind in putting me in touch with people. So I'm very grateful for all the people who helped me on this book.
I think the next film that followed that one was the Rob Zombie Halloween 2. Is that right?
No, Resurrection was the one that came after H2O.
Oh, and then this one?
No, there was Rob Zombie's Halloween, and then this one.
I'm glad we've got you here, Wayne, to clarify these things. So, because I've not seen any of these Halloween films. I've not seen any
Resurrection.
zombie ones.
Resurrection was another one of the Weinstein's ones, and it was, I'd say it's probably, along with Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, probably the least beloved of the franchise. I'm speculating here.
Just the most reviled, depending on which way you want to.
Yeah, that's a very diplomatic way of putting things, Wayne. It's probably the least beloved.
Well, see, the thing is, again, there's people I know who made these movies that I really love and respect.
Course. Yeah.
So it pains me to say that a movie they did was terrible.
Yeah.
I appreciate their work in making the movie. I think that's very important as well.
Yeah.
So Halloween Resurrection would be the next one, followed by Halloween and then Halloween 2. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Halloween Resurrection is kind of the end of what you could call the formal trilogy, which is Halloween 1 to Halloween 8, not including part 3 perhaps. But it's fun. I've had fun watching it. I mean, it's very much of its era. It was 2001, I think, and it's all about a reality show filming in the Michael Myers house. So half the movie is filmed through these kind of early GoPro kind of cameras,
right.
So reality footage.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting visual experience.
Found footage movies were very popular around that time.
Very much so. Yeah.
I mean, I have seen this one.
Yeah.
I mean, the final fight with Busta Rhymes and Michael Myers. I mean, come on. This is the quality we're dealing with, But,
thanks for reminding me, Rachel. My maths was never my strong suit. Appreciate that.
Halloween Resurrection. I recommend it after a few beers, and that's about it. But it's a fun.
Well, it's got Tyra Banks in it, which is a plus point for me.
Yeah, it's a fun and inconsequential Halloween sequel.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We won't spend any more time on that one. So after that, would you have then the first Rob Zombie? Is that right?
Yeah. And I'm not a huge person for gore, so
right.
You can imagine how I kind of feel about Rob Zombie's excessively violent movies, but I do think there's a lot of really, really interesting thematic stuff going on in this movie. And I think the first act is superb, absolutely superb. It's a different kind of Halloween. It's if you're into the whole idea of him just being this blank, motiveless evil, you're not going to jive with this movie, because this is all about, he sets it up that, he comes from this kind of almost quote unquote white trash family, very, very troubled with this, abusive patriarch. So he's basically explaining why Michael Myers became Michael Myers, and I like it. I have to say, I do like it. It's a rich material to write about. Does it make a good movie? I think it's a good movie. It's very interestingly shot by Phil Parma, who came from the independent and documentary world. So he brings this gritty, dark, very energetic style to it. So a lot of handheld camera work. So it's almost, he's bringing his documentary experience to a Halloween movie, which is jarring and interesting. So it's definitely it's a unusual Halloween movie and very interesting.
Have you seen the unrated director's cut?
I have. It's brutal, as in vicious, like violent. The theatrical version is vicious and violent, and the director's cut even more so.
Right.
So.
I mean, you've got Malcolm McDowell in here, who's an actor that is always fun to watch. And then I saw on the credits Brad Dourif as well, Lou Temple, who's another pretty interesting actor. So there's a decent cast in there. I'm not familiar with the younger cast in this picture, but
there's some actually. Danielle Harris, who played Michael's niece in 4 and 5, appears here as one of their friends. So again, he does give good fan service across the two films. He does pay tribute to what has come before. So
Elliot's mother, Dee Wallace, is in this film. You know what? She is a massively, massively underrated actress, man.
Yeah.
I think she puts in a fantastic performance in E.T. that no one ever talks about.
Yeah. And Cujo.
Yeah, and she's done some other really good, characters in other films. Sometimes the films don't best serve her talents, but I really rate her as an actress. I would love to have seen her do bigger things. It's a shame more people didn't use her really.
Yeah. But Brad Dourif is brilliant in the film.
Yeah, he's got Inside Man's moustache on.
He's playing the Charles Cyphers character from the first movie, Sheriff Blacker. It's really good.
Right.
Definitely worth a watch. I mean, it's as the title said, it's Rob Zombie's Halloween. It's very much him. It's very much his style that he brings from The Devil's Rejects and House of a Thousand Corpses. It's unmistakable, and it's laudable for that. I mean, he's not trying Carpenter at all.
No,
he's not trying any of the directors. He's very much his own filmmaker, and it's Rob Zombie's Halloween. There's not much more you can say other than
that. So did you manage to get hold of Rob Zombie for a chat?
I tried again, wrong timing. He was on tour at the time with his band. So I had the opportunity at one stage to go back, and I was like, this book kind of came about some difficult times in my life, you know what I mean? So I was doing three books at the same time, and this was one of them. And some things kind of came up in life that made it hard to juggle all of those. And it got to a point where, like, normally I spend a year on a book. It's enough time to kind of kick your ass into gear, get the work done, get the interviews done, and just write. When it goes over a year and things get dragged out or anything like that, I don't like that. So it was getting to the point where it was getting, I think, too big, too many interviews. I needed to keep it more concise, so I didn't end up going back to Rob Zombie and somebody else. So I kind of said, okay, I have what I have. I have all the interviews, and I'm just going to work with this. So, it's just one of those writing quirks. I just I don't like going over a year. I think once I go over a year, I start to kind of get anxious and, itchy feet.
So Rob Zombie did a second film, Halloween 2. The second Halloween 2. God, it's so confusing for me. Several of the same characters return. Malcolm McDowell's back. This is a couple of years later in terms of release. What is there to say about this film? I haven't seen it. Inside Man, have you seen it?
I've not seen this, no.
So, Wayne, the floor is yours once more.
It's very stylish. It's very surreal. It's totally off the wall. It is unlike any other Halloween movie. I find it just too vicious, too gory. I mean, it's not subtle in any way. In fact, it feels like Zombie is being somewhat antagonistic to his audience in that I don't think he particularly wanted to make this film. He had more creative control on this one because, again, he clashed with the Weinsteins on his previous one, because at that stage, it was a co-production between Dimension and Paramount. So you're dealing with both the Weinsteins, you're dealing with Paramount. So there was a lot of issues there from a kind of a commercial corporate point of view.
Yeah,
on
I
this,
can imagine.
He was working with I can't remember, was it New Line or whoever it was, but different people. And Malik Akkad gave him, free reign to come back and do what he wanted. And he did what he wanted, and it's a total and utter bloodfest. It's vicious, it's pulverizing, and it's not fun. I can find the fun in Halloween Resurrection or in any of the lesser sequels. You can find something to enjoy. But Halloween 2 is one of the movies that I wouldn't stick on with a beer for fun.
Right.
I've seen it now several times for when I first saw it, when it came out, because I wanted to see it, and then other times for analytical purposes, writing the book or reviewing it or whatever.
Or to traumatize an ex-girlfriend, perhaps, but not.
Exactly. No. I traumatized my wife with Halloween 3. Every time.
Okay. Yeah. Many times over.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. But now Halloween 2, it's visually stunning. It is very much an art. I call it an art house horror. It's very unique, unusual, but I think all of that style is just undermined by the relentlessness of the gore.
Right, that's a shame.
It's just not fun.
It's interesting to note that there's at least 4 characters from the previous movie that have turned up in this one, because these 3 characters were all in the last film, And normally in most Halloween films, not many of the cast survive until the final reel. So I imagine quite a few of them probably don't make it. There's definitely 3 dead people in this shot. Yeah. Okay, so which one came after this?
So then you're getting into the 2018 reboot,
Right.
the next trilogy. And if you hold that thought for 2 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. This is the return of Jamie Lee Curtis again, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, she came back and needed that new swimming pool. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, look, I could never blame any actor. For
Oh
coming
God,
back
no,
to
no,
anything
no.
for, you know, for
I'm being a little
paycheck.
bit facetious.
No,
but,
no. I mean, you know, I mean, I know that you know, as well as anybody. You know, I think we're aware. You know, Michael Caine has never made any kind of, you know, any pretense about the fact that the majority of his films have been done for a paycheck. Sam Jackson obviously does exactly the same thing now. So, because this, you know, you only have a certain shelf life as an actor. So, when the paychecks come along, why not take them?
Yeah. Just want to say hello to Left Eye Ego, who's another fellow YouTuber and considered by many to be a sex god of YouTube. He's in the chat and watching, so appreciate you tuning in, brother. Yeah. So and Wayne, another great YouTuber and film nerd. Sorry, Wayne. So so we now going into Halloween 2018.
Yeah, and this kind of had the same effect as H2O in that it was a commercial rebirth for the franchise and cultural. I mean, the fact that Jamie Lee Curtis comes back is always kind of cause for celebration and box office receipts. But interesting, yeah, David Gordon Green, who, I mean, he comes from kind of lower budget thrillers and dramas and comedies. So an unusual choice, and it's a very good film. It's a strange trilogy. I mean, it's a very good film, but I think
is this the one where she's got the house with all the fortifications and traps and shit?
Yeah,
I've seen this one. I really liked it.
My problem with this film, if you saw the trailer before you saw the movie, the trailer features the best scene in the movie, which is the opening.
I didn't see anything, which I was very grateful for. I try to watch as little as possible.
Yeah, but it's very good. It is it's not my favorite. I mean, again, just looking at the stills here, they really lean into the gore on this trilogy.
I mean, one of the things that I liked about this movie was I felt I'd seen the very early Jamie Lee Curtis Halloween movies, 1 and 2, and maybe one other one, and or the trailer for the other one, and I felt like that was all I needed to have seen apart from Halloween 3, and I could watch this and it just naturally followed on. You know, didn't have to have seen all the other stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what I was saying earlier on, the different threads. So now you're kind of going, this is just a sequel to Carpenter's movie. So it forgets about 2, it forgets about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is just its own sequel to part 1. So you have another kind of 4 movie strand here.
Yeah.
So, but no, it's very good. I mean, it's David Gordon Green I don't think has a very interesting visual aesthetic or anything like that. I think it's a very good workmanlike piece of mainstream horror cinema.
Yeah,
you know, he's not he's not even like a Dominique Otten Gerard who's trying to bring some European art house sensibilities to it. He's just making a very good, very economical, direct kind of horror movie, and it works.
Yeah, I think he directed something else that I really rated because I think that made me write to him, because I'm sure I've written to him because the name just sticks in my head. He directed he directed Pineapple Express. It wasn't because of that. And it wasn't the George Washington movie, both of which I've seen. I liked the film Joe he did with Nicolas Cage. I thought that was really good.
And actually, Danny McBride was the co-writer on it as well, which is, again, Danny McBride, who comes from more kind of comedy.
Yeah.
Material, you know, it's unusual pedigree.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did Stronger, which was starring Jake Gyllenhaal and about the Boston Marathon bombings.
Yeah,
Was
but
kind of
I think this,
recovering. That was another one.
This movie had Carpenter's backing as well. I think he's involved on some level of production, but
he's got a cameo in it. I think doesn't he have a cameo in it?
Well, Nick Castle, who was actually one of the guys to don the mask in the first movie, has a cameo here in the mask. It's very hard to make him out, but I think this movie kind of came with. It's like
yeah, there he is, Nick Castle. There we go.
Yeah. It's like what Inside Man was talking about earlier on. It's like with Halloween 3. It's like, what is it about these movies that we kind of retroactively kind of go back and see? We appreciate. I think this came around now. It's like 40 years later or whatever it was, and it's paying fan service. It's far enough apart from the first movie that the first movie now is an accepted classic. It's not just a small little horror movie anymore. It's not a small indie movie. It's an American classic. So for this movie to come along and pay tribute to it in all the right ways, it has Carpenter involved. It has Jamie Lee Curtis involved. It has Nick Castle. It has all these other little Easter eggs for fans. It feels legitimate. So I think it hit at a right time in culture in terms of the 40-year distance. We have that nostalgia for the 70s and the 80s that but its function, it's put together in a way that's suitable for contemporary horror audiences in that it's gory. For a start, it's very juddery in its editing. It has that certain look to the cinematography which I would associate more with Netflix movies or something like that. So it's contemporary, but it's classic at the same time. It's trying to align itself with the 1978 movie. So I can see why
got a pumpkin in a fish tank, which I don't think that I've seen that in any of the other Halloween films.
It does. It does a lot of more so in Halloween Kills. Actually, there's a lot of little Easter eggs in there for fans of the franchise for the sequels.
Well, Halloween Kills is the next one,
which is my favorite of these three.
I don't think I've seen this one because 2021 it came out. Lot going on that year for me. I definitely did not see a Halloween film.
It's an interesting one because being that we knew going into it, it's part 2 of a trilogy. It could have been just a holdover, and it is kind of a holdover in that we're just waiting to get to the third part. So it's not going to wrap up anything. It's not trying to be important in a way that the first one, the previous one is, which was saying quite a lot about, it had a kind of a feminist angle, and it was saying a lot about, survivors of abuse and violence and things like that. This film had none of that. And I love that about it. It's like, it reminds me of like part 2 or 4 or 6 or whatever. It's just trying to be a good Halloween sequel that has no pretensions intellectually, perhaps. There's a couple of things in there that it's trying to touch upon socially, which were relevant in 2021 or whatever. But ultimately, it just wants to be a good sequel, a good Halloween sequel, and it excels at that. It's playful, but not in a kind of in a to the degree where the jokes kind of take you out of the horror side of things. So I applaud Halloween Kills. I think it's very enjoyable.
And then that brings us to, well, I guess the final film currently, I want to say, with caution, which is Halloween Ends.
Yeah, probably my least favorite of the entire franchise.
Well, yeah, you kind of gave that away by your sudden intake of air and speechless tone. Tell us why this is your least favorite.
I don't know. I have no words. It's just, it's not enjoyable in any way. And it doesn't, I said the same about Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie one, but at least that had immense style and creativity and imagination. This one is just dark and morbid and depressing. And the best moment of the film is literally the end credits, because it brings back Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, which was like, I was like, yes, thank God, something to enjoy in this moment. But there's so little of Michael Myers in the film. And I don't mean that in the same way that there's no Michael Myers in Halloween 3. This is part of the Michael Myers world. So like they tried to set up this other troubled teenage character as a potential replacement for Michael Myers, and it doesn't follow through on that. But it's just bland gore fest, and it's not fun, and it's not enjoyable. And
David Gordon Green directed all 3 of these, I think, the trilogy.
He did.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. I mean, the one good thing I will say about it, actually, they get rid of Michael Myers in a way that he has no comeback. Because we were joking earlier on, is like, he gets shot, burned, stabbed, run over, and he still comes back. The way they kill him in this, there's no coming back. So.
Do they decapitate his head and put it on a pole?
They go even further than that. They chop him up in a meat grinder kind of thing, and
Right.
The only thing that's going to result in Michael Myers is some Myers burgers on the grill.
So, who were you able to talk to for your book from the last trilogy of films, from the David Gordon Green era?
None of them. I didn't pursue anybody. The only person I spoke to in regards to these 3 was Tony Timpone, because he had a very interesting, I would say, professional and personal angle on them. Because even though he wasn't the editor of Fangoria when they came out, he's followed the franchise all the way through from a professional perspective. I just didn't care. I didn't care enough about these particular movies to really dig into the production and the making and the aesthetics of them. But of course, if you're doing a book on the franchise, you have to include them. So the section of the book on those films is more about critique and analysis of what's on screen. So and plus they're very fresh in people's minds. So there's a lot of material out there on their making anyway. So there's no point in me retreading that territory.
No, that's absolutely fine.
That's one of the great things about writing books. You can kind of be your own boss and decide what goes in.
David Macy had a question for us much earlier. I'm sorry, I'm only getting to it now, David. Question for Lance and Wayne. As a new writer who can't afford an editor, how would you recommend I proceed before publication? Slowly and carefully would be my advice. I could not afford an editor for my last book, Silver Screen Journeys. I rushed it out before Christmas because I was determined to make a Christmas deadline, because people like buying people books as Christmas presents, and I did get a lot of sales as a result of that. But all of those books are riddled with typos. The spacing on the photographs is off. There's even a couple of photographs that are now in the book that weren't in all the books that got printed before December 24th. So I would say take your time. Once you've written your manuscript, leave it alone for a bit. Come back to it at least a couple of weeks later with fresh eyes. Read through it slowly and read it aloud as you're reading it, because you're more likely to spot the mistakes if you read it aloud. That's my advice if you don't have an editor. Wayne, anything to add to that, tricks wise?
Wow. Apart from my first book, I had an editor on every one after that, but I don't know. I see, because I never really came from a literary background. I was never a big reader. So my approach to writing is very much kind of, does it sound good and interesting to me? Does it flow properly? I would be terrible to teach a class on literature or writing in any way, because I don't have that kind of context. I always say I'm a watcher more than a reader. I get my information from how I interpret the movies. It sounds a bit pretentious, but I don't know. I guess I've been lucky. It's an ear for language, I guess. When you're reading over what you write, does it look, and as Lance says, when you read it aloud, does it sound like it should?
Yeah.
Like on my first book, I had no idea how to approach publishers, how to approach editors. I had no idea it would ever get published. I just knew there was one particular publisher that I wanted to publish the book. So I kind of foolishly sent it to them, the manuscript, to a office at email, very generic. So I thought it was going to end up in a junk mail, and I just said, hi, can somebody get this to the editor of the film department or something like that? And like 3 weeks later, the editor of that department got back to me and said, oh, we love this book. It's perfect for our series, which was the series I kind of envisaged it would be part of. And I was like, great, this is fantastic. It was like so surreal. And then I kind of had a panic attack. I was like, oh shit, now I have to deal with an editor and all the stuff that you have to deal with in terms of writing and grammar and punctuation. And then I said, okay, what do you want me to do? Send me your notes. And he says, it's perfect. We don't want you to change a thing. Just add another little prologue, to put it in context for certain readers. So
that's fantastic.
And also quite
what
rare.
A great story. What a great story that is.
Thank you. It spoils me to a degree, I think, because if I do, if later on I did have an editor come to me with a question, I'd be like, really?
So how big would you have seen this book to be in terms of page count if you had your own way?
I think it's actually bigger than I ever would have thought. It's my biggest book to date, I think, just in terms of size. I think it's 270 pages or something like that. It'll come out at, and it's for Bloomsbury, so it's my first kind of major publisher book.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. So that was a different experience, because I've worked now with, I'd say, 5 or 6 different publishers, and everyone is different, and you get to know how they do things, so that's always an experience. And coming back to the editing, you work with different editors, and different editors have their own interpretations of your work. So I don't know, the editing question is an interesting one. It's really down to, my only advice is, does it read, obviously you're a reader of books, you enjoy books, so when you read your work, does it read like something that you think is quality, that looks and sounds like something you would pay for? And as Lance says, come back to it, because when you're knee deep in it and you're rewriting certain parts, or you're rereading certain parts over and over and over again, you can become blind to it. I mean, I've had manuscripts which, just before they get published, we notice typos, and that's after me going over it with a fine-tooth comb and several editors going through it as well. No matter how many layers of editors it goes through, you have to have that final read through, and I don't know, it's every writer's journey is so different. I could never prescribe a way to do it. I was lucky, I guess, with that first book, the way I did it. When I think about it now, I sent the whole manuscript in an office email, which was so foolish because it wasn't copyrighted. It wasn't, protected in any way. Anybody could have taken it and did whatever, but I was just brazen, I think it was, brass neck.
I think that's probably what kind of sold you to them, really, the sheer sort of brass neck of it. And that's a fantastic story. So what's next for Wayne Byrne then?
Oh man. As I was saying earlier on, there was 3 books. This was one of 3 books I was writing at the same time, and all the deadlines kind of came crashing together. So this book and another book are coming out next month. The other book is Roy H. Wagner, A Cinematographer's Life Beyond the Shadow. So it's my first biographical, properly biographical book. It's about Roy, who's, eminent cinematographer who's worked on tons of movies, TV shows, a lot of horror movies, actually.
Incredible individual.
Really, really interesting and artistic cinematographer. And the other book is called The Evolution of American Film Music, 1960s to 1990. And I co-wrote that book with my best friend, Amanda Kramer, who is the keyboardist of the Psychedelic Furs.
That's right. Yeah, I remember you saying this last time. Yeah,
she's from that world. So that's our second book together. So those 3 are coming out soon. And then I have another book that I'm working on, which is tentatively titled Life, Love, Class and Culture in American Cinema of the Late 20th Century. So it's a bit more academic in title and tone, but it's really about examining a certain batch of films from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and whatever,
Right.
from a class and cultural lens. So as I was saying earlier on, I approach a lot of my books from this kind of sociological perspective and cultural. So I'm writing about a lot of movies which don't necessarily get written about in such a manner. So I guess this book is my reaction to these three, which were heavy on big famous movies, interviewing a lot of directors and actors and filmmakers. This book is purely just me. I'm not interviewing anybody. It's purely criticism and analysis.
Yeah.
So it was something I needed. As I mentioned earlier on, writing these three books happened during a kind of a tough time in my life. So I just wanted to retreat and just write. For me, not necessarily for a huge audience like this Halloween book, which, it's like, as I say, it's Bloomsbury. It's a mainstream book. It's going to be on a lot of shelves. And you have to consider that when you're writing the book as well, that it's for a different kind of audience than, say, my book on Tom DeCillo or my book on Nick McLean. So you do have to think of, well, this is going to reach a lot more people, and your writing style, not that it changes, but you're considering a different kind of readership. So you try to rein in your more, your tendencies to get a little bit too pretentious, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose with your Halloween book and your Number on Elm Street book, you know exactly what the audience is. You know what they're into, so you know what language to use, how to approach the subject.
Exactly.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up because the Nielsen ratings is on in 9 minutes. So we're doing another stream right after this. Don't forget to check out Wayne's other books. I have the Burt Reynolds one, the Walter Hill one here. And then you've got the Burt Reynolds one here, the Elm Street one. There are others. Great reads. And this book is available for pre-order now. You Can't Kill the Boogeyman. The information is below. I have just added it. So if you refresh the page, it'll be there just above Wayne's biography. So Wormy Spoon says, let Wayne come on the Nielsen ratings. Mate, if you want to come on our next stream, you can. We're just talking about the latest stuff we watched, but I'm sure you probably want to go to bed.
I wish, man. I've book work to go and do.
Yeah, he's got.
Thank you, Wormy Spoons. I really appreciate that. I will again, for sure.
I liked that you said your next book was different in tone and slightly more academic. I could say the same. My next book, Back to Raving at 50, is slightly less academic and definitely different in tone. So it'll be interesting to compare books when that one's out for me. You've got I need to send you a copy of Silver Screen Journeys, Wayne, because it'll be.
Oh, please do, man. Please do.
It'll be right up your street. And I just revised the format of it today, and I added a couple more pictures. So there's probably about 7 different versions of it out now. But I went through it and corrected all the spacing and made sure there wasn't unnecessary gaps and things like that. So, Wayne, thanks so much for coming back on. You're always welcome here. So if you ever do want to come back on and talk about your next book, we'll happily have you.
That'd be great.
Our channel is here to support independent creators, of which you truly are, sir. And I love the way you speak so passionately and affectionately about the different talents of the people involved in these films. And as you say, they are the unsung heroes. You do talk to the people that, you speak to the directors, but you speak to the DOPs and other people, and you're not afraid to give them a shout out. And I think that's great.
Absolutely, man. Well, listen, they inspire the passion for movies that bring us to this right here. So
yeah. Well, we're going to be back live in about 7 minutes. My God. Yeah. With the Inside Man, myself, Stepenzo, and Northern English Bastard, with episode 60 of the Nielsen ratings. Is it the 60th one? That seems absurd. Episode 60. We're talking about the Oscars, but Inside Man will definitely be talking about some obscure Italian horror movie from the 1970s. You can almost guarantee there'll be one of those thrown in. But we are going to talk about the Oscars briefly a little bit. I have tried to watch all the films. I've certainly seen some of them, so we'll give our own opinion on who we think should have won. That's it from us for tonight. Thanks so much to Wayne for coming on. Thanks to my co-host, the Inside Man, who'll be back with me in the trenches very shortly. So we're going to be back live again at exactly 10 o'clock. Do tune in for that. And if you can't make that, then come and join us on Sunday. I think we're going to be doing another Chew the Fat on Sunday. Haven't quite. It might be The Hunt for Red October and Crimson Tide, because of course we lost Gene Hackman, and funnily enough, Wayne, he's my favorite actor of all time, and I'm really interested in writing a book similar to your Burt Reynolds book about Gene Hackman. So I might bend your ear on that, because I know. Yeah, I know Hackman's work really well, and it might be something you could run by your publisher, maybe even.
Let me say good night by giving a big shout out to The Package, one of his underrated.
Oh, mate, we talked about that when we did a stream on his birthday. I like to think he was still alive then. It's the 30th of January. Myself and the Inside Man talked about our top 5 favorite Gene Hackman movies. And we mentioned some honorable mentions, and The Package is brilliant with Tommy Lee Jones. Great. Fantastic film, great score, really good movie.
By the great underrated Andy Davis. Great director.
Yeah, it's a shame that film kind of disappeared. But I saw it on the cinema. I was very lucky. I saw it at a film festival. So it's a great movie. I'm going to have to do a stream about it at some point. Maybe I'll get you on for that.
For sure,
so the forgotten films of Gene Hackman, we might do some of the ones people don't remember. All right, then, that's it from us. We've really got to go because we're on in 4 minutes. So until then, you'll see us real soon. Wayne, you can get straight off, mate.
Thanks to everyone for tuning in.
All right, speak soon.